973. What could you ask about today? Well, there's a plethora of things. We've just been talking about the new COVID variant. You might want to ask about that. What's been happening in the Channel over the past week and the summit that Priti Patel wasn't allowed to attend at the weekend. Or hot off the press, Keir Starmer's reshuffle. I have a little list right here. Doing a Neville Chamberlain, holding it up now. I'm not going to read it all out, but we are going to be talking about that after 9, but I'd love a question on that too. With me on the panel today, we have Robert Buckland, who is Conservative MP for Swindon South. He's also the former Justice Secretary. Francis O'Grady is General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress, or is it Trades Union? I never get that right. Does it matter? Khalid Mahmood is Labour MP for Birmingham, Barr, and Madeline Grant joins us. She is a columnist at The Telegraph. You can watch us on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, and you can also watch us on the LBC Facebook and YouTube feeds.
Call 0345 60 60 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first question. It's from David in Enfield. Hello, David.
Good evening, everybody. Does the panel agree that Boris Johnson is very good at winning elections, but incompetent at running a government?
Robert Buckland, you've just left his government. You can be free to say anything that you like now, can't you?
Well, what I would say is the honest answer is that Boris is the best campaigner of our generation. And I've said before that I think campaigning is important, and I think that's how you get power. But governing is also very important. And I think how you govern is how you're going to be remembered. And I think that what we have is a Prime Minister who's fizzing with ideas and anxious to get things done and makes lots of announcements. But what we need to do now is, rather than making more and more announcements, let's actually concentrate on what we said we'd do in the manifesto, which I helped put together, and deliver it. And that's certainly what I focused my mind on when I was Justice Secretary. And my strong advice to him and to everybody in Cabinet and government is to do the job. Look back at that manifesto, read it and implement it. I always had the manifesto on my desk because that for me was the guidebook. And I take a leaf out of Margaret Thatcher's book, who always talked about implementing the manifesto. You know, I remember her saying, we've done 90% of our manifesto, we're going to finish it by the end of the Parliament. If we had more of that talk, I think the public would be much clearer about the good intentions of the PM.
So you're effectively saying that Boris Johnson looks at his own manifesto as a bit of a work of fiction?
I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that sometimes it's good to go back to first principles, and tempting though it is to fly off with all sorts of new initiatives and ideas, let's actually get the job done. I would say in large measure things are getting done. Legislation's being passed, the manifesto's being implemented, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about what we said. It wasn't just get Brexit done, it was unleash Britain's potential. That was the other part of the headline. Well, that's what I think he's doing. Well, let's talk about it and let's talk about that plan.
But there are so many manifesto promises that have already been broken, aren't there? That's the problem.
Well, you say this. There have been, shall we say, there's been a huge change of circumstances, which was COVID. That wasn't in the manifesto. And that clearly has changed the way in which the finances are being run, the way in which we fund public services. In fact, you know, very often the way in which we do government. Now, putting that to one side, there's still plenty in that 2019 document, it's only 2 years old, that has aged well. And frankly, we are doing. So my view is, let's focus on what the plan is. Let's talk about how we're doing it, and let's fill in all those gaps where we haven't finished the job.
Francis, I imagine you have a slightly different perspective, or maybe you agree with a lot of what
I think the worst thing that any politician can do is over-promise and under-deliver. And I think that has been the hallmark. I think David's right in his question that that's been the hallmark of this government. If you think about HS2, people in Leeds feeling pretty let down. If you think about social care, that was all going to be sorted, and then we discovered...
To be fair to him, he has at least come up with proposals, which is more than any previous government has done.
People who paying a bigger share from fewer assets, people in the north again, properties worth less, valued less, they're going to be hit harder. Social care majority of social care workers still on less than £10 an hour. And I think a lot of us actually were prepared to roll up our sleeves on a levelling up agenda. I think that was, some of us were a bit confused about what it meant, but we were kind of prepared to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt on that, and still would. But it's got to include raising living standards. It's got to be about, for sure, pride in place, but that takes hard investment and patient investment. It takes a real industrial strategy. It takes cherishing our manufacturing industry and making sure it can thrive. It means having a proper skills strategy, which we still haven't got after all this time. So I think there is a sense in the country of people a bit of fatigue around that kind of campaign persona where he gets up in front of the CBI and makes jokes that don't quite land anymore, and people feel, we're in serious times, we want serious action, and there are a lot of problems that need fixing after 10 years of austerity with our public services. There are a lot of problems that need fixing.
Just a reminder of the question from David in Enfield. Does the panel agree that Boris Johnson is good at winning elections but bad at running the country? Madeline, think back to his time as Mayor of London, where I think if you take party political hats off, I think he did a reasonable job of running an administration in London, and he surrounded himself with some really good people. Yeah. And I wonder whether that is actually behind David's question here, where he hasn't really done that this time.
Yes, or at least when he was Mayor of London, he was surrounded by people who kind of had a unity of vision, and they were generally working towards the same ends, and they could agree on certain principles, and you could delegate power effectively. But what I think we have instead is often competing power bases within Number 10. Many people have made the comparison that it's almost similar to kind of court politics, and you have one faction will be in the ascendant, and then the other one.
It's not always the case, though.
I think you could certainly see how that's played out with, for example, when Dominic Cummings was in the ascendancy, and then you see how the influence of Carrie's power base and the Green agenda has really taken centre stage. I mean, I think I broadly agree with the question that David asked. In a way, I think the two things complement each other. It's precisely what makes him good at winning elections that potentially doesn't always make him the most coherent governor of the country, because he's good at reading the public mood. He's very tuned to opinion polls, but that often leads you acting without a coherent political philosophy, because you're at the mercy of what you see in the polls. And I think
some of your readers don't see this as a Conservative government, do you?
No, many of them don't. And I think it partly does go back to that thing of being overly responsive to what you see in the polls, which leaves you incapable of leading and incapable of carrying out what you're trying to do with the unity of purpose that is essential to decent governance.
Khalid?
Yeah, full of bluster, full of slogans, but when he actually comes to deliver, I think he is really wanting. And as you said, in the mayoral team, he had good people behind him to do that, as did Tony Blair. When he came into New Labour, he made huge changes, basically because he had a united team. He had people who had the thirst and the drive to do something, to achieve for the nation what they wanted. And I think the problem with Boris is he's got a very divided Number 10 at the moment, and has been ever since he came in. You got this sort of the Conservatives in their corner, and then you got the social ideologues who wants just to get to win the elections and not look at what's going on. So Conservatism and the Chancellor is fighting against the populism of Boris Johnson. I want him to do some of those social things that he should be doing, but I want that to be properly done for the people. So it's not just a battle against the Chancellor, it's about delivering for the people who need it most.
Madeline, you heard Robert there say, well, he needs to look at the manifesto to get a bit of grounding. Is it as simple as that, or what do you feel he needs to do to convince the country that he's not only an election winner, but he's a good Prime Minister?
I think it certainly does go back to the manifesto in part. I mean, I think that a big source of contention, certainly for our readers, is the fact that the key manifesto pledge on raising taxes has been broken, notably, and will surely be broken more in the next few years, given the direction of travel. That infuriates people. And I think it's potentially based on a misunderstanding of the polls, an idea that the Tories' new voter base in the Red Wall or wherever are, in favour of a bigger state, when that's not necessarily the case. So I think that definitely feeds into it. But overall, I think it's a case of having a philosophy that guides you throughout. And I think that's why Margaret Thatcher proved highly effective, because everything she did, she was straight with people. You knew where you stood with her, whether or not you agreed, whether you agree or disagree with what she did. There's no doubt that she had a kind of plan, and she generally followed it through. Whereas I think that the incoherence we see from Boris Johnson, the fact that he will merge, quite often quite sort of social democrat policies, but he'll talk in abstract about how much he likes free markets and so on. I mean, I think that's what you get when you have a lack of coherence at the heart of what you're doing.
But Robert, lots of people say ideology is bad in politics. So Madeline was saying we need to be a bit more ideologically rooted. And of course, thinking back to the Thatcher years, we all think of that as a sort of ideologically rooted government. But actually, Margaret Thatcher was a big pragmatist.
She was a massive pragmatist. What she did have was very clear principles. This is what I think is important. Yeah. I'm not an ideologue. I'm a classic Tory. I don't believe in ideology. But what I do believe in is enduring principles. Whether it's sound money, whether it's being fiscally responsible. And by the way, fiscal conservatism does involve sometimes a measure of tax rises. Like Geoffrey Howe's 81 budget was a tax rising budget, let's not forget. So, the Chancellor shouldn't be criticised for that. But at the same time, we have had massive shifting sands in terms of what's happened in the world. So he's to be forgiven for that. But I do think that, if he's, retiring to bed tonight, if he's listened to anything that we've said, he should reflect upon the fact that I think he does have enduring principles about what he wants to achieve for the country, and he needs to go back to them and talk about them in a coherent and repetitive way. The Prime Minister loves new initiatives. It's exciting when you have new initiatives, but sometimes you've got to repeat the message so that people hear what you're saying and understand what you're saying in their busy lives. And I think that element of discipline is lacking, and that is what we need.
Well, if the Prime Minister isn't listening at the moment, he can catch up on the Cross Question podcast about an hour after the show finishes. Just to round this off, Francis, he's obviously a very charismatic individual, and that appeals to many people. Yet you have a Labour leader who I don't think even his biggest fan would say was Mr. Charisma. Is that a problem for Labour?
I think it all depends on the electorate and what the electorate wants. And my sense is that, well, maybe we'll talk about this later, but with new worries around the virus mutating, around what that means for livelihoods, about what that means for our NHS and social care system, I think people are looking for a degree of seriousness that, unfortunately, the Prime Minister doesn't seem able to summon up at the moment. But there's lots that he could be doing. I mean, you don't have to raise taxes in a way that hits middle-income workers and low-paid workers hardest. You don't have to do that. You could be thinking about the employment rights bill that we've been promised for years now, and yet still haven't seen. That would relieve people of those real worries. Certainly I hear about 0 hours contracts and full self-employment and fire and rehire. These are real problems that people are facing, where actually there's broad consensus. I think we may disagree about how, but we agree it needs to be tackled. Why not get on with it?
David, thank you very much for your question. Keep your calls coming. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:15.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
18 minutes past 8 on Cross Question. We have the former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland, Francis O'Grady from the TUC, Madeline Grant from the Telegraph, and Khalid Mahmood, Labour MP for Birmingham, Perry Barr. Next question is from Stephen in Harrow. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, how are you doing? Just a quick question about the mask, and it's going to be law tomorrow.
Yeah.
With TfL saying it's going to be law, I'm a bus driver, and we haven't got any powers to tell people to come off the bus. And over the pandemic, the whole period, I think maybe the police come on the bus once out the whole lot of that time. So on the buses, I think it's not going to work.
So what has been your advice then? Presumably they've told you what to do if somebody comes on a bus without a mask on.
No, but we haven't got any powers at all to tell someone to come off the bus. No powers at all. And this is a bit, as bus drivers, what we don't get, because we're policing. If you pay your correct fare on the bus, or if you don't pay, we tell them to come off. But something that potentially could kill someone, we haven't got any powers.
Because shop owners do have the right to say, well, I'm not going to serve you. So what you're saying is you don't have the same rights or powers as a shop owner. Khalid, that does seem to be a bit of a problem here, because there will be people who go on trains and buses who just don't wear a mask. What should happen then?
Well, it's a huge problem. I think what you're doing is getting the workers at the sharp end trying to police this. People who are not paid enough, people who don't have the responsibility or the wherewithal to deal with it. Whether you're a bus driver, whether you're a tube driver, whether you're a train driver, whether you're a taxi driver, to a large extent. You're trying to earn a living. On top of that now, you're going to try and have to police people. But also, I think what has happened over the last months that we've been in Parliament is that very few of the Conservatives have been wearing masks. And what that goes to show is how seriously you take it. We all on the Labour benches certainly decided to wear the masks because it's important to set an example to the people. So we can't just put past diktat and say you've got to do this unless you've actually demonstrated that you're prepared to do it yourself.
Madeline.
Well, I think that the fact that it doesn't have an obvious mechanism and that those who are charged with enforcing it lack the wherewithal to do so, I think that slightly reflects the way in which this has been rushed through. You know, it's all happened very quickly. We've gone into panic stations mode at the arrival of this new variant, and the government has acted quickly. I think it's that sort of do something mode that you get a lot in politics, which is we're here, we're looking busy, here we go. But actually, you know, even though I don't think I agree with Khalid quite in everything that he said, but it's definitely true that you need to get the population to have bought in to something like this. And I mean, what is the
evidence today? I would say, well, I mean, it's purely anecdotal, but from what I've seen today on my train and indeed in Charing Cross Station, I would say double the amount of people wearing masks today than were last week. So, because you're right, public consent is absolutely vital here, isn't it?
Because we don't have the troops on the ground to be, you know, a policeman in every train carriage to check that people are going along with it. And I have noticed that it seems like the British public, in opinion polls, they say they like restrictions, but they won't do it until they're officially told by someone to do it, which strikes me as quite a shame. You know, I think if you believe in it, you should do it or not. We shouldn't wait for the government to tell us whether or not to wear them.
Playing devil's advocate, Francis, on trains, of course, there are guards who check that you've got your tickets, and they do chuck people off a train if you haven't got a ticket. So what's the difference here?
I think there's a big difference. I mean, let's remember, as Khalid said, these transport workers, bus drivers, train guards, but also workers like shop assistants have worked right through this pandemic, and there has been an alarming increase in assaults on key workers during, this is, if you like, the horrible picture of what's happened in real workplaces. And so I know that there are lots of key workers in particular who are feeling really anxious about how are they supposed to deal with this. And also, of course, whilst I think all of us would really encourage people to wear masks, we also know there are some exemptions. You know, key workers are just not in a position. How do I judge whether this person is being honest in saying I'm one of the ones who's exempted? So, I mean, one of the things that seems really important to me that we did when the pandemic first kicked off was to say to government, bring us all around the table. That's how we developed those first national guidelines on health and safety that were about doing what people are supposed to do in law already, proper risk assessments, making sure that...
And you were brought in on this, weren't you?
We were, but I tell you, we had to hammer on the door, if I'm honest. And it was at a time, you'll also recall, when various ministers were saying, get back to work, with no more working from home, without any notice or any recognition that actually people just want to be spoken to. And very often we can come up with pragmatic, sensible ways through, but you cannot expect the worker on the front line to deal with an angry and, sadly, in some cases, potentially violent customer. You cannot put them in that position.
But train guards have to do that every day, don't they? I mean, I get the point about bus drivers, but train guards are there to enforce rules.
Well, rules, but this is something that the government has introduced as a law without yet being clear about how it's going to be enforced. And I do think it's important, because I think we all want this to work. Actually, most people, I think, have been incredibly sensible in wearing masks, also voluntarily, in fact. I've noticed that. But people do like clarity and they do like consistency, and workers on the front line want to know, what do I do when somebody says no?
Robert?
Well, look, I really thinking about Stephen's dilemma. He's right to raise this because there are contradictions. So if you are, for example, behind a shop counter and somebody comes in who's clearly underage and wants to buy cigarettes, you're obliged by law not to sell those products to underage children. And in fact, there's criminal legislation on this. So there's an obligation on the shop worker and the shop...
Alcohol as well.
Alcohol's another one. Actually on trains, it is a criminal offence actually to travel on the tube or the train without paying your fare. So, you can be fined, you can be dealt with for that. So we've got already some contradictions here, but they're all based... So what shop workers and guards and people on trains are doing is enforcing, the law. But with masks, I think inevitably it's all about degrees. Now, you could have a series of, other laws and regulations to put an onus on, say, Stephen and bus drivers to enforce the law. I'm not sure that's going to help anybody, bearing in mind the sheer volume and number of people that we're expecting to wear masks and the impracticability of enforcing such a law. I think the reality is here that we're talking about consent. And the very fact, I think you've made the point already, Iain, the very fact that today, and I noticed it coming into London today, far more people on my train wearing masks, thank goodness. I've been wearing it throughout because I just think it makes sense. But it's clear that when
including in the chamber of the House of Commons.
Well, look, we came to a position a couple of weeks ago where we were in the absurd position of employees in the House being told to wear masks and MPs not being required to wear masks. I just thought that was absurd. We're not employees, but we are office holders. And frankly, if other people in the building are wearing it, why the hell aren't we? And that was my view. And I've certainly been wearing it around the place. And, when I leave my office, etc., and doing what I see all other employees doing. What I like about this is it is clear. We've had a sort of lack of clarity for a little while on this. And the fact that the government prepared to act swiftly over the weekend and reimpose this regulation does give clarity. It doesn't solve Stephen's problem in its entirety, but I think he'll find that tomorrow on his bus, if he's on duty tomorrow, if he's working tomorrow, a lot more people will be complying. But I do accept that he's still going to have...
wouldn't one way round this be for the British Transport Police to effectively do a blitz on buses, so people get the message that if you don't wear the mask on the bus, you could because presumably they can issue on the spot fines for this. So that surely would be one way to do it.
We should sort this out. But again, this issue about exemptions is important. Frontline workers shouldn't be in the position of potentially discriminating, because that's one of the worries. But also there has to be consistency. I don't know whether people around this table know that during the whole pandemic, there has been only one prosecution of a single employer by the Health and Safety Executive. Now, don't tell me, because I've seen them for myself, that there aren't more employers and workplaces where those rules were broken.
What do you put that down to?
It's been cut massively over the last 10 years. The number of inspectors on the ground has been cut massively. There was also, I think, frankly, I'm the kind of person who, our health and safety reps, if you see a problem, my God, they're like a dog with a bone, they're going to sort it, because this was about workers' welfare. In the same way, Robert, quite rightly, you said about wearing a mask in the House of Commons, because staff are working there too.
It's very odd, though, that there's only been one prosecution. It's a bit like there have been so few prosecutions for employers having ignored minimum wage legislation.
Exactly.
You think, why would that be?
And you need a bit of a deterrent, frankly. People need to know.
Possibly it says that the law has been badly designed. One remarkable statistic that I saw recently is that I don't think a single lockdown fine has actually been upheld on appeal, which suggests that things have been drafted quickly, possibly enforced wrongly. We've been doing this in panic mode, and I don't think it's a very healthy way to run a democracy, to be quite honest. We haven't even voted on a lot of what...
the health and safety laws are there. 15,000 people of working age have died during this pandemic, and yet only 2.5% of those deaths have been reported by an employer. I'm not saying all of them involved workplace infection, catching the infection at the workplace, but it stretches credibility beyond belief. It wasn't more than 2.5%.
Khalid, Madeline implied that she thought these regulations have been introduced a little bit hastily. Is that an accurate summation?
I think it's notable that a lot of this hasn't been through normal parliamentary checks and balances. They've been waved through using statutory instruments. They haven't been voted on.
There is going to be
properly.
A vote tomorrow.
There is, but it happens after the event. Northern Ireland, they've brought in COVID passports. They're not being voted on until a week later.
Do you think it was right for the government to act so quickly? Because this is one of those occasions where you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't, isn't it?
I think in this instance, because we caught the variant fairly quickly, anything that we do is good. Because what we've done with the Delta variants, we didn't do that for about 6 weeks. And therefore caused a huge effect. And so therefore I think it's important that we catch it now, we deal with it, we get the people who do the clinical trials and studies on this, that they look at it as quickly as possible. So we actually start to make headways in doing that. But I think in terms of the laws and the decisions that have been made around that, the simple issue is no law will work unless you have the consent of the people. I don't think the laws are particularly badly drafted. Robert would, I'm sure, would comment.
He drafted them.
Oh, don't blame me. Some gifted draftspeople.
But even it's a statutory instrument, the committee does go through them, and we do try our best to try and go into one.
But what I would say, Madeline's point about the legal framework is an important one. The Public Health Act is the thick end of 40 years of age. It's out of date. Mm-hmm. We do not have adequate emergency legislation in this country. And the one thing we've got to do after COVID is get that framework right. The Civil Contingencies Act of 2004, you've got to get parliamentary approval every 7 days. How can you do that in the middle of a pandemic when everybody's locked away? We've got to find the right balance to answer the concerns of people like Madeline. I have concerns about it. We've got to do better.
We're going to move on in a moment to a question on Keir Starmer's reshuffle. It was interesting earlier today, a Labour supporting friend of mine, I was quoting Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun. He said, I don't think I'm going to take any notice of Harry Cole on this. Well, Harry Cole has just tweeted this. In the roles that really matter today, Treasury, Home, Health, Education and Biz, there is no doubt this is a dramatic shift from the mess of the last 5 years. It may have taken 2 reshuffles to get there, but I think Keir just took back control. Well, there you are, the endorsement of the political editor of The Sun. We'll come to a question on that in just a moment. It's 8:31 on LBC. Time for the news headlines with Lucinda Horsley.
The World Health Organization says early evidence suggests there could be severe consequences globally from the spread of the new Omicron variant. It's been announced today all over 18s in the UK are going to be offered a booster jab sooner than planned. Sir Keir Starmer has reshuffled his Labour top team, making Yvette Cooper Shadow Home Secretary and David Lammy Shadow Foreign Secretary. Lisa Nandy, who did have the overseas brief, will now challenge Michael Gove on levelling up. A jury's been selected for Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking trial in New York, which is now underway. The 59-year-old has pleaded not guilty to enticing minors over a 10-year period. LBC weather, a cold evening across the southeast of England, but turning increasingly cloudy and mild overnight. Some rain in the north, a low of 3 degrees.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:35, if you've just tuned in, we're with Robert Buckland, Francis O'Grady, Khalid Mahmood and Madeline Grant. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put your questions to them. They're here with me until 9. This is a text question from Paula in Croydon. If you want to text, you can do so on 84850. John Ashworth appears to have been sacked as Shadow Health Secretary. Considering we're in the middle of a pandemic, is this a good idea? And how can Keir Starmer still claim to have been the unity candidate, considering he sacked the Corbynites? I'm not sure that's wholly true. Kat Smith has certainly gone, but I think she went of her own volition. I don't think she was sacked. Wes Streeting replaces John Ashworth, and he hasn't been sacked. He's been reshuffled to the DWP. And I saw a tweet from John Ashworth a moment ago where he said he had been the longest-serving Shadow Health Secretary and it was time to move on. I guess he would say that, wouldn't he, Khalid?
No, I think John is fairly upfront when he's got to say something, and he does say it, and he has said it. I think he has been there as the longest Shadow Health Secretary, and it comes to a space when, particularly in opposition, if you're actually doing things in government, it's a lot different. In opposition, just doing things which you want to get through, very rarely have a chance of getting anything through at all. And so I think to move on to DWP, which is a hugely important department, and I think John remains his credibility in taking that department over.
Are you surprised that Yvette Cooper has agreed to come back into the Shadow Cabinet?
Well, I'm actually very pleased that she's come in. I support Yvette hugely, have done during her leadership campaigns. I think she's very competent. She's kept that Home Office portfolio through the chair of the committee, and she's really in tune with it. She knows what the issues are, everything from policing to radicalisation. She's got a handle on that, and I think she'll be absolutely wonderful, and it'll be a great Home Secretary.
Now, you resigned from the front bench, didn't you, not that long ago? Why was that?
I resigned in April this year, basically because I wanted to spend some more time doing some of the stuff that I became into Parliament for. It was 20 years into Parliament, and I actually thought, what difference am I going to make to, depending on whenever I decide to go. And I wanted to look at radicalisation. I came in when 9/11 happened, and the fact it's still growing is a real concern to me, and really I want to concentrate on that. And the second thing is around about engineering and apprenticeships, which is what I am.
It's not quite what you said at the time, though, is it? You said that your party had been taken over by, quotes, a London-based bourgeoisie with the support of brigades of woke social media warriors.
That's true, and that was in turn of the local election that was just had, the results that we had, and I still believe that. I think when people go out, particularly in engineering, manufacturing, any jobs you do, whether you're working in a warehouse, stacking shelves in a supermarket, or going out to industry, those are the people that our voters are. Those are the people we're going to go for. There is no red wall. Those are our people. And we're going to support them because that's what they do. They go out to work, and most of them have to leave the house to do it. And that's why it's so important.
So David Lammy being promoted to Shadow Foreign Secretary, Wes Streeting, Ilford MP, being promoted to Shadow Health and Social Care Secretary. Are those two who you meant by being woke warriors?
No, David's very much hands-on, and I've known David for a long time. He just came in before I did on a by-election for Bernie Grant. And David's somebody that you can regularly speak to, and David's very good in terms of that. But being the first black Shadow Foreign Secretary, I think is a huge achievement. He's become a real statesman over the last few years, and he's doing really well, apart from the programme that he does for the LBC. And we'll have to see about that.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to David Lammy reporting live from Johannesburg or wherever. Robert, you've seen reshuffles come and go in government and in opposition. Yeah. This seems to be a much more serious team, a sort of, dare I say, government in waiting.
Well, I think whilst I agree with what's been said about Yvette Cooper, I remember when she was Shadow Home Secretary last time, I always thought she was very effective. I have a lot of respect for a lot of those names round the table.
Sense of butt coming?
Yeah, of course there is. It's actually, what are they saying? What are they trying to deliver? What's the policies? And I'll say this about the Labour Party, elections probably coming in 2 years. Where's the policy development? Where's the serious think tank work that you need to do? The wonkery, not wokery, the wonkery that you need to do in order to really have a detailed plan for government. There isn't any. And this is their problem.
You wouldn't want to exaggerate, would you? I mean, there are Labour think tanks that clearly are doing this sort of thing. The IPPR, for example.
Well, look, I respect, the good quality work is done, but I'm not seeing a real sense of purpose. I think where they are today is that they might just about be getting the hang of opposition. Now that's a start, yeah. But getting the hang of
Could you be more condescending?
They are. Well, I've got to say it as I see it. I'm afraid I've got to say it as I see it. And David Lammy was my shadow. Got a lot of time for David, and he's quite well connected internationally. He's got friends across the world, and I can see why Keir's gone for some names, people who are known out there. But ultimately, the name that matters is his. And he's got still a lot of work to do to convince people that he can lead the country and lead an alternative government.
Francis, you look down this list and there aren't actually that many new names that come in. Yvette Cooper is clearly the standout one. He's sort of shuffled the pack around, hasn't he, rather than sacked a lot of people and brought new people in.
I haven't seen the list in full.
I've got the list here if you want to have a look at it.
Thank you. But I think any leader of the opposition of any colour of party has to have a laser-like focus on winning. And, you have to be really, really determined to win, and you need a team around you that's hungry for power, not just protest, but actually power and governance to make a difference to the lives of the people you want to represent. And I disagree with Robert in one respect in particular. Over the summer, we saw from Labour a big campaign around a New Deal for working people that set out very clearly the improvements in working lives that actually we've been arguing for across the spectrum. We're at the point where whoever delivers it, we want somebody to deliver a crackdown on some of those exploitative practices like fire and rehire and 0 hours.
But that was Barry Gardner doing that. He's not on the front bench.
No, it's the New Deal for working people has been
but on
set
fire and
out in great
rehire,
detail.
why wasn't that? Who is Labour's shadow employment spokesperson? I don't know who it is.
Keir Starmer talked about it when he addressed the TUC Congress. So this is something that's important to us because trade unionists tend to be practical people. We want to fix the problems.
The reason why Barry's come in on this is because he had a bill on private members' bills he got through.
I spoke to Barry on Saturday.
And that's why he's come in. Has done a fantastic job going around the country. But it's how you get access.
I've been supporting him, I'll tell you.
So it's how you get access to bills was the issue here. And because it got through the ballot on the private members' bills, that's why it's been put through.
And I think it was pretty shameful that it was filibustered out. I'll be honest. Real groups of workers.
I think behind the scenes, the government have promised they're going to do something.
Let's hope so. But let's get a move on.
Madeline, is there a single Telegraph reader that is going to think, looking at this list, I'm going to vote Labour now?
Let's see what the letters page tomorrow says or the day after. It's definitely been, as reshuffles go, it's definitely been successful for Keir Starmer. The last one was a bit of an omni-shambles. I think he tried to sack Angela Rayner and ended up giving her more job titles than George Osborne at the height of his career. So there's, it's an improvement, and there are definitely big names. And I think that point about recognition and people that people have actually heard of is very important, because a huge part of the problem for Keir Starmer is simply that people have switched off. I think it doesn't really matter what his message is. Very little of it seems to seep through. And he's had a bit of a hard time in the pandemic, because generally what they have been arguing for, the opposition, has been whatever the government's doing, but slightly stronger, which is it's hard to differentiate yourself. We haven't been having the usual discussions about policy where you can kind of show what you're really about. But I think as Robert said, I think we have to see what they say. And there are lots of issues that matter greatly to the British public that Labour is so far either I think at odds with the public or so vague that you couldn't possibly know what they thought of it. I think immigration is an important one we've yet to see, and it's quite late in the day to be fleshing all of that out.
I don't think Preeti's got very far with it either. I think really it's a huge shambles to allow so many people coming through and putting lives at risk, as we've seen last week.
We're coming on to that subject. Well anticipated, Khalid. 8:45.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, arrival of this Omicron development. Never mind this Christmas, Mr. Brown. Can I put it to you that if we don't tackle issues in parts of Africa, we could start worrying about Christmas 2022?
If we can't crack this problem that we have a world that is half vaccinated, then the disease will ultimately spread and there will be more new variants and it will come back to bite us, even in countries where we've had 3 vaccinations or even more vaccinations to protect ourselves.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Time for another question with Dale in Southampton. Hello, Dale.
Hello, Ian, and good evening to the panel. My question is, in light of the tweet that the Prime Minister did with regards to the letter that he sent President Macron, do they feel that that was a misjudgment, and that he is actually not the international statesman that he should be? Personally, I have private conversations with friends and colleagues that are sensitive, and if I was to voice those, I would lose respect from them and further dialogue. What does the panel think?
Good question. This, of course, happened on Thursday evening. I actually read out the whole letter on air, which took rather longer than I thought it might, if I'm honest. And my producer says, yeah, we wish you hadn't. But immediately after that, Madeline, I interviewed one of President Macron's own MPs, Bruno Bonnell, who said he agreed with every single thing in the letter.
Yes.
And then, of course, the next morning, Macron basically blew up.
Yes.
But was it right to make this letter public?
I think it was right because it was very civil. I think the letter itself you couldn't fault. It was very cordial to the French. It had laid out some practical proposals, and I think it was right to make that public because it shows it would add pressure to what they're trying to achieve. And right now, I think the French have often been unreasonable. They've often been guilty of precisely what they accuse us of doing. And the kind of agreements, I think, there's two ways of approaching this. One of which is to, to start to look at amending our existing human rights legislation, which many people would not be in favour of. The alternative is some kind of agreement with France. France is not playing ball. They have their own reasons for doing this, some of which are, I think, quite populist, exactly the kind of things that they accuse Boris Johnson of doing. So I actually think, in the circumstances, if you're going to sort of say that, you doubt the Prime Minister's statesman skills, I think there's perhaps better examples than the letter.
Frances.
At a personal level, for me, there has been nothing more depressing than watching two governments play playground politics when people
I thought you were going to say willy
children
waving there.
Are drowning in the Channel. I find it quite astonishing. To me, it has, even in its own terms, it hasn't been effective.
Do you think the motivation of writing this letter and making it public was to deliberately antagonise the French?
I have no idea, but if that's the case, then it's even more depressing. I mean, this is a real issue that needs to be resolved. There are real lessons for us about how you treat and get on with your neighbours. In real life, if we behave like this over the garden fence with neighbours, it wouldn't be surprising that we didn't get what we wanted. But this is real lives at stake, and that's what I find pretty shocking, that we're seeing pictures of pregnant women, a former Afghan soldier, children in peril. And there are ways to solve this, including options that haven't been addressed, like safe passage, that serious people who've been working on this for years are advocating, and it should at least be taken seriously as an option. If you really want to break that business model of the smugglers, then creating safe passage is one way to do it. But also, it's possible to be pragmatic and humane. And it feels to me that we've somehow lost our souls in this. The way that it's being discussed and argued over seems to forget that there are real lives at stake.
Robert, of the five people around this table today, you probably know Boris Johnson better than all of the rest of us. What do you think his motivation in writing this letter and making it public was?
I think his motivation actually was very sincere. I think, as Francis said, this was in the wake of an appalling tragedy that night. I think he felt impelled to try and take some action. I think the content of the letter, as Madeline says, is, you can disagree with some of the points, but they weren't couched in an incendiary way. It was a detailed series of suggestions. It looked like the sort of letter that was carefully prepared, probably with the Cabinet Secretary and others in the room. I was thinking about how that letter would have been drafted and how many iterations it would have gone through. If there's any criticism to be levelled, well, perhaps there should have been some diplomatic channel work before the letter was sent. I don't know whether there was. However, I will say this. I think that, Francis made the point here. The French are coming up to an important election, but that's not an excuse for them to descend into, a slanging match here. And I don't think it's an excuse for the British government, by the way. I really don't. I agree with the points you make. This is a serious set of issues that needs to be dealt with seriously. But I think, in the context of the question that's been asked, I don't think the Prime Minister was trying to play political games at all. I think he's trying to get a solution. I can tell you this, Iain, you've asked me, I know him well. Yes, I do. He is extremely vested and concerned in this issue. He's frustrated by it. He thinks about it a lot, and he wants a solution. Now, safe passage has been suggested. Yes, that's a reasonable line to pursue, but there are very reasonable arguments that would suggest that that isn't the right thing to do. But clearly, what is needed here is not just Anglo-French cooperation, but much wider cooperation through Europe and across European solutions.
It's not the way politics should be done. Certainly between governments, it's not the way that politics should be done. If you're going to do this in a press release, do a press release. If you're going to give an open statement to the press, do that. but don't break the trust of the people that you're trying to work with. I know people that would be quite frustrated if I had a constituent and I was dealing with their case and I'd made that public. Whatever interest I had, it is not the way you do things. And I think more importantly about the seriousness of this issue, it's tragic. It's so tragic, it's unbelievable. I said to Priti Patel on the statement that she made, is that will she accept these safe passages that are given to people coming through? She worked around, didn't answer the question. So either you're going for that or you're not. If you're going for that, you have to give the direct passage. Priti Patel and the Home Office has been woeful in trying to control this issue. You don't speak to the French, we don't speak to the Europeans in the way that we did. We got the job done, but these are the consequences.
But the French Interior Minister says that he speaks every week to Priti Patel, and when they have conversations, it's all very friendly and constructive. And then she goes out and makes incendiary statements.
It's no good having good conversations when you don't achieve anything. And that's what we want to do. I believe this is a lot too late now, because when originally some of these crises happened, we allowed a lot of people to die, a lot of people to suffer. What we should have done, taken the advice of the international aid agencies, is setting up places for these people to come through to actually be checked and given safe passage in the first instance. Once we allowed those people to walk through Eastern Europe and then all sorts of boats to come across and giving all that sort of money to the people smugglers that we have done, we're too late in this. What we've got to do is go back to stopping people coming into Europe, and that's the key thing.
I very much agree with that point, but I don't think that offering more safe passages will entirely solve the problem. I think some of the people who so tragically drowned perhaps wouldn't have been the ones allowed first through the safe passage, because they weren't necessarily top of the list of the neediest. So I think that alongside offering more safe passages, which I entirely agree with, it also needs to be the case that you to change the incentives around it so that you cannot enter the country legally and gain asylum that way, because as long as that incentive exists, these tragic crossings will keep happening. And I think you have to think with both head and heart.
It's got to be possible to enter at the moment. If a former Afghan soldier finds that the only way he can enter the country is by getting on one of those dinghies, what does that say? I thought we were supposed to have a resettlement scheme.
Well, I think you do.
What's
you do
happened?
more. You try and do more through other ways.
The vast majority have no legal way of entering the country, and I think that's the problem.
Well, that's what needs to change. But you can't have it so that there are serious incentives for people to make these journeys. Because as long as that is in place, then the horrible business model of the traffickers will continue.
Alice in Northwich says what used to be called megaphone diplomacy, Iain, never works, as I'm sure you know. And going back to the question on the shadow cabinet reshuffle, are there any levers in the new Labour shadow cabinet? It's basically a people's vote tribute ban, says Simon. I have looked through the list and I have to say I can't spot a single one. Point. But there we go. I'm going to apologise to Richard in Woolwich, who I had hoped to get to, but everyone spoke for a little bit too long there. So I'm afraid, Richard, if you want to call back tomorrow night, I guarantee that we'll get you on tomorrow night. Just time to end with a fun text from Jean in Sheffield. 61 people spent 3 days trapped in the UK's highest pub after getting snowed in on Friday night, having travelled to watch an Oasis tribute band. I can think of nothing worse. What's your favourite pub, Robert Buckland?
Well, I have an embarrassment of riches. I think off the top of my head, I would say the Cresselly Arms, which is down in deepest Pembrokeshire, which has an open bar in the summer. You can have a drink outside. It's lovely. It's very COVID compliant as well in the summer. It's a delightful.
And thereby fending all the pubs in your constituency. Francis O'Grady?
I love them all. I don't think I'd better name the particular Irish pub that I was once locked in because it didn't take a snowstorm.
Francis.
Lush. Using in the down with the kids' sense of the word. Madeline.
I think mine is probably a pub where I used to work. I loved it because it was in Stratford-upon-Avon, and lots of lovely tourists who have paid very generous tips, especially if you talk to them about Shakespeare, and it's called the Black Swan.
Khalid.
I have 3, although I don't drink. I have 3 because what I do is different councils. We go out for lunch, and some of the local people we go out to lunch to. And so those are the ones they prefer. We actually go and have quite a good time. We spend a couple of hours having lunch. They will consume alcohol, and I will have my sparkling water usually. But we have a great time, and they're a good resource to the local community. And I think we want to encourage more pubs.
Name them.
The beaches, the tennis courts, and the Church Tavern.
Okay, well, I'm going to give a shout out to the Bucks Arms in Blickling in Norfolk. Marvellous food as well. Right, that brings us to the end of Cross Question for today. Robert Buckland, Francis O'Grady, Madeline Grant, Khalid Mahmood, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tomorrow on the show, we have Professor Anand Menon from UK in a Changing Europe, Damien Green, the former de facto Deputy Prime Minister, Francis Foster from the Trigonometry podcast, and Baroness Jenny Jones, the Green member of the House of Lords. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, experts say early evidence suggests there could be severe consequences globally from the new Omicron variant of COVID. The World Health Organization says the strain could lead to a surge in cases and the risk is very